as a worship leader, as a lead worshiper, I'm doing something innovative. I'm using the heart of music and my heart to connect the heart of the people to the very heart of God's heart. I mean, that's never been done in the history of the church.
What about hymns?
Him who?
Hello, my name is George.
And I'm Jorge, and we've just released a new CD, George and Jorge Remix the World.
You see, there's so much great music out there that is worthless because it doesn't worship God.
That's right. So what we've done is we've healed and purified them with just a little touch of Jesus.
We'll give you a taste of it right now. 1, 2, 3. So I put my hands up, worshiping my God, and the sin just flies away. Wah, wah.
Healing the sick like Yah, preaching the word like Yah. You know what this book is, Skippy? This is the only book that should be in churches other than the Holy Bible. Yep, you guessed it. It is a hymnal where such classics as Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. You know, stuff like that. Good stuff. Awesome stuff. But you know, today's music, it's just a little too loud. It just sounds like it should be in a bar.
You know, the ancient church was really offended by hymns because it reminded them of bar songs.
Well, flip me over and tickle me twisted. Didn't know that. Still too loud. I'm just a leper, nobody loves me.
He's just a leper from a leper colony. With scaly skin, he's a monstrosity. Do not come, you must go, and your skin not show.
Let it show.
Must not show.
Let it show.
Must not show.
Let it show.
Must not show. No, 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 no.
Pharisee, Pharisee.
I've been called a lot of things. Snake handler, reptile man, crazy. But I'm going to tell you right now, there's no worship service that can shake 2 sticks at my chapel time. That's for sure. Get back in there, Carl. Where were we? Oh, yeah. My church believes in the fear of the Lord. And ain't nothing put the fear in a man like a rattlesnake. Tell me. You ever sung He Has Made Me Glad with a poisonous reptile stretched across your trembling shoulders? If not, then you've never truly worshipped. You don't believe me? Let me show you. Carl? Oh, Carl's out. Y'all start praying. Start looking around and start praying. I'm serious. That snake will kill you dead. Carl! Somebody get me some help. I ain't gonna touch that thing.
I'm not a heathen. I just got saved by my good Lord.
Yeah.
I just got saved by my good Lord.
Oh, yeah.
I just got saved by my good Lord. I'm not a heathen.
Tonight's a night. Let's praise the Lord. I got some money. Let's tithe it. Tithe it up.
I'm not a heathen.
Well, there is no recovering from that. We should just go home. Well, good morning. You know, that was obviously very exaggerative on styles of worship. But today, you know, we're continuing our 5 fruitful practices on passionate worship. And isn't it interesting that when we say worship, I think a lot of that, maybe not to that extreme, comes to mind. We think of the styles, the forms of worship, and sometimes we get really caught up in that. And so, you know, I was thinking about this earlier today that, you know, the churches around this community have become the Baskin-Robbins of worship. I mean, we have 31 flavors. You know, if you don't like one style of worship, go to another church. They have another style. And so many times when the word worship is mentioned, that's where our mind goes. The other thing I thought of is that immediately we think of worship as confined in the 4 walls of this space. We think of it as church. So luckily, we're not going to talk about either one of those things. We're not going to talk about style. We're not going to talk about where worship necessarily happens. What we are going to talk about is 3 gentlemen in the Bible, 3 patriarchs who embodied worship and in different ways. And it is my hope that as our journey begins for some of us, as it continues for maybe some of us, that we will find ourselves falling into a passionate worship for Him. Amen? All right, let's get to this. So let's look, if you will, in Psalms chapter 84. Psalms chapter 84. I know it'll be up on the screen so you can follow along there. In Psalms 84, verse 1, listen to what it says. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of heaven's armies. I long, yes, I faint with longing to enter the courts of the Lord. With my whole being, body, and soul, I will shout joyfully in God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow builds her nest and raises her young at a place near your altar. O Lord of heaven's armies, my King and my God, what joy for those who can live in your house, always singing your praises. What I love about this verse is the psalmist here, which is King David, he gets it. He understands what it means to worship God. Now, if you read those verses and you really start looking at the pronouns, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a long time since I've studied English, so bear with me if it's wrong, I'm sorry. But if you look at those things, he keeps saying, how lovely is your dwelling place. You know, David's not concerned with the drums or the guitars or the organ, the pipe organ or the piano, and all those things are fine. What he's saying is, and I want you to listen to this, he's saying worship is not about me. It's about your dwelling place. Man, I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but I just wanted to go through some of these things. It says, I will shout joyfully to the living God. It says, how lovely is your dwelling place. I long, yes, I faint with longing to enter into the courts of the Lord. And here David is saying it's not about the act of worship. It's about the object of worship. And David lived his life. He lived his life wanting to worship God. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I want to look at three things that worship is. And as we compare these to the lives of these three gentlemen in the Bible, I hope that we see ourselves in maybe where our worship needs to go or where it needs to begin. Look with me, if you will, in Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22, verse 5. I want to read you this verse. It says this in Genesis 22, verse 5. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then we will come right back. The first thing I see about worship is sacrificial. Let me repeat that. Worship is sacrificial. You say, what are you talking about? Well, let me give you a backstory of Genesis 22. Abraham, who's considered the father of faith, he is the patriarch in the Bible. Him and his wife Sarah have no children. The Bible, in some versions, uses the word barren, meaning they could have no children. Obviously, this bothered Abraham, and Abraham knew he was called to be something great for God, but here, obviously in the Bible, children was a huge part. That was part of your inheritance, was children, and you gave your inheritance to them, and so he was troubled over this. So one night, he's talking to God, and God says, hey, come outside with me. I want to show you something. So they go outside, and God shows him the heavens and the stars in the heavens. And he says, you see all those stars? He said, your family tree is going to be greater than the stars that you can count. Now, obviously, that's funny when you have no children. You're thinking, yeah, God, you missed it here. Me and my wife cannot have any children, and yet you're telling me my inheritance or my descendants' family tree will be as great as the stars in the heavens. If you fast forward a few years maybe from there, there's three men that actually visit Abraham one day while he's milling about in the whatever Abraham was doing back then. And so these three men show up, and they're messengers. And they start talking to Abraham, and the one guy says, hey, your wife is going to have a baby, a little boy. And Sarah was in the next tent over fixing food, and she lets out a little yelp. This is like what my dog Max does when I accidentally step on his tail. She went, hoop. And the servant said, your wife just laughed. And he goes to Sarah and he says, why'd you laugh? She goes, oh, I didn't laugh. Anybody want to know? Anybody want to take a guess of what Abraham's son's name was? Shout it out with me, if you know. Isaac. Do you know what the word Isaac means? That's it. And so every time Sarah, God has a sense of humor. Every time Sarah went, Isaac, she went, oh, I laughed at the promise of God. So here Abraham, fast forward now to Genesis 22:5, Abraham is being tested by God to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. He is asked to take him to the top of Mount Moriah and sacrifice his son. It's interesting that Abraham, of course, had already been made this promise that his family tree would be as the stars of heaven, and yet now he's being asked to sacrifice his only son. Now, I think about, listen, in the Bible, I don't know if you ever read the Bible this way, but you should really read it and try to put yourself in that situation. I mean, try to put yourself in what Abraham what's going through his mind. I'd be like, my firstborn is Bailey by 2 minutes, okay? So she's the firstborn. And if God said to me, Danny, man, you are not going to believe what Bailey's going to become one day. She's going to be an amazing worship leader. She's going to be a missionary, change the world for the kingdom of God. She is going to just change the kingdom for your honor and glory. Oh, God, that's awesome. Great. I'm not going to fail at being a parent. That's awesome. Hey, great. I want you to sacrifice her. I'd be like, well, but wait a minute. You just told me she's going to be this amazing. Yeah, I know, but I want you to sacrifice her. I mean, Abraham was a human being just like us. We would be like, God, you are crazy. There is no way. You just told me that my daughter, of course, and Abraham said, you just told me my seed's going to be as the stars in the heavens. Why would you possibly want me to sacrifice my son? I love this. And love what he says in 22 verse 5. He says, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. You know, this is the first time in the scriptures the word worship is used. And here it's involving sacrifice. And I love what Abraham says, because he's like, hey, I know God made this promise, and yeah, this is a little crazy what he's asking me to do, but God must be going to perform a miracle because we're coming back. Me and Isaac are on our way back down this mountain when it's all said and done. Now, I'll let you read the story on your own time, but I want to give you this side note. You know, it's interesting. They go up to this mountain, and while Abraham has his son on the altar, he raises the knife, and it says the angel of the Lord stopped his hand. And it said that Abraham looked, and in some brush was a ram. You know, a ram is a male lamb. And isn't it interesting that God called Jesus Christ the Lamb of God? He was the Lamb of God. And here is Jesus offering himself a sacrifice in Genesis chapter 22, a picture of the Lord in Genesis. And I thought about that. I thought, you know, here God asked Abraham to do this horrific thing in sacrificing his son, and yet 2,000 years later, God would do the very same thing. He would take his son up to a mountain, Calvary, lay him down, and sacrifice him for you and for me. You see, God doesn't ask us to do anything that he himself has not already done or is not willing to do. So how does that relate to us? Church, God is asking us to get out of our comfort zone and worship him. He wants us to get out of who we are and what we think we are and worship him. You know, I've been hearing stories and testimonies about how God is calling people to worship him. How God is getting people out of their comfort zone. And you know, we just about a couple months ago, we had a big vote on the fact that we're going to go to another town, and we're going to go to another place, a place that, you know what, it's out of our comfort zone, but we're going to go to Price Hill. We're going to go to Price Hill, Shiloh at Price Hill on Elberon Street, and we're going to worship him over there because it's a sacrifice, and God's calling us to make sacrifices for him. Are you with me? I said, are you with me? God is calling us to make sacrifices, to sacrifice our life for him. It's amazing that here in this story, this horrific thing that God had Abraham do, and yet Abraham was obedient to him. You know, the second thing I want to look at when it comes to passionately worshiping him, passionately worship him comes from being set free. I want to read you this verse in Exodus chapter 7, verse 16. It says this, "Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness." Here the children of Israel are in captivity, and God is about to perform a mass exodus with his people. And I find it very interesting that God is not wanting to deliver Israel just so they can go out into the wilderness and just do what they have always wanted to do and live their life according to what they just want to do. No, he's asking them to get out of their comfort zone, to go into the wilderness, to be set free, and then to worship him. He's wanting them to worship him as a result of being set free. You know, church, if you've been set free from the chains of sin, from the things that enslaved us, you know you're a prime candidate for worship. You are. You know it's real easy to worship him when you've been set free. It's not quite as easy when we're in slavery to sin. But God was calling his children, the children of Israel, to worship him. And it was because he was about to set them free. I have a good friend that lives in Dayton. He's a chaplain of a jail. And one day he asked me to come do worship at their church. And I was like, yeah, or not church, I'm sorry, the jail. And I was like, absolutely, yes. And so they had a church service. And so we went to the band, got together, and we all went to this jail facility. And it was a room that was so small. I mean, probably the size of this stage. I mean, maybe a little bigger. And we had drums, guitar, I mean, everything set up. And, you know, it was loud. And, I mean, the guys enjoyed it. I mean, they were worshiping. But on the last song, I said to him, I looked at the guys, I said, hold on, just don't play anything yet. And I just kind of plucked around on the guitar, and I started singing this song. And it's called Lift High. And it goes like this. Let me see if I can sing this for you. It says, lift high, your chains are gone. All rise, exalt the Son, Jesus Christ, the Holy One. We lift our eyes to you. I mean, I started singing that. And boy, these guys, they knew what it meant for those chains to be released. They knew what it meant to be set free. And boy, they just stood there with their hands raised and a smile on their face, the love of God. You could see it in that place. God just came into that room and just moved in such a mighty way. Church, when we're set free, we can passionately worship him. I thought about this, you know, at Easter time, we had this amazing service. I'm actually going to do a quick sidebar here. Hey, Brent, right in the worship sanctuary is a cardboard thing. Could you go get it for me? Our transition between services were quick, so I forgot my cardboard. So I'll explain to you in just a minute. We had this amazing service on Easter, this crazy worship service, and people started lining. They were coming across the stage, and they were saying things on their cardboard that were their testimony. How many of y'all were here for Easter? Most of you. And so here, people were just walking through and saying, hey, this is where I was, and this is how God delivered me. And I'll never forget it. I was in the first service when we did it, and I was kind of in the side door, and I was kind of opening the door for people as they would walk out, kind of directing traffic, you know, okay, you go, you know, and we're just kind of directing traffic. And man, I'm watching this, and I'm so moved. I'm like, man, God, that is amazing how you're freeing people, how God is setting people free. Then I'll never forget, as we came into the second service, I was setting up here playing, and we're playing Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, and boy, just the overwhelming thought of how God had set me free. I was putting this sermon together, and Pastor Rachel, she had a word from the Lord. And she said, I think you should do one. I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, because, you didn't get a chance to do one at Easter time. Thanks, man. I said, oh, okay. God just really was dealing with me, and I really thought about what would I put on my cardboard? I mean, I'm supposed to have it all together, right? I'm a pastor of this church. I'm supposed to have everything figured out. And God said, you don't. I said, yeah, you're right. Now, I'm not as artistic as some of the other people were when they came across the stage here, so this is horrible writing, and I'm going to have to read it to you because I ran out of room. Even though I had the template and pencil, I still went, whoop. This says, feelings of failure, not living up to my potential. This was a big deal for me. I joke about it a lot, and you've heard me say things from the pulpit here. My father's a Baptist minister. He's probably preaching right now in Lebanon, Ohio, just a few miles away. My dad is he's kind of a pretty popular guy in the Baptist church, certain circles, you know. And when I was growing up, everyone was like, man, Danny's going to be just like his dad. And I used to think, man, there's no way I could be like my dad. He speaks, and man, people just are so engaged in what he's saying. And he says, he could get up and just preach these beautiful sermons, and man, people would just flood the altars, and many people would give their heart to Christ. And we traveled for 10 years. Actually, I did for 10. He traveled for 20 years, doing 45 weeks a year in evangelism on the road, thousands of people coming to Christ. I said, there's no way. I can't live up to that. And I convinced myself that I was probably going to be a failure because I couldn't live up to my dad's, maybe his expectations, but quite frankly, I just couldn't live up to my own. I was talking with someone after church, and it dawned on me that after the first service, it dawned on me that sometimes we put things on ourselves. That, no one really put this on me. I put it on myself. I said, I can't live up to that. But God set me free. He redeemed me in such a way that now I know I'm living out His calling in my life. You see the reason I get so crazy up here, and I treat each worship service like it's going to be the last one we ever do. Thankfully, He keeps giving us another one. But the reason I get so crazy up here is because He set me free. And when you've been set free, boy, it's fun to worship. And this used to be me. You wouldn't believe it. I used to be, I wouldn't say an introvert necessarily, but I used to be afraid to get on stage. I was scared to death. If there was a group of people milling about talking, like maybe over here, I'd walk all the way around them just so I wouldn't walk near them because I was afraid they'd say something about me. Isn't that weird? That's what I lived under. Now I know they talk about me. So I just walk right through them. But God set me free, and that's why I get so excited. Man, when I hear the band playing songs like Here I Am to Worship, and I'll never know the price it costs, man, that's why I get beside myself, because I've been set free. And I love that verse. It's not on the screen, but it says, when the Son sets you free, you are what? Free indeed. I love that. And boy, passionate worship comes from being set free. Praise be to God, He sets people free. Let me give you the last one. Passionate worship is a lifestyle. No one embodied this more than King David. Look with me in Psalms 100, verse 4. I'll just read it from this. It says, enter His gates with thanksgiving. Go into His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him and praise His name. Boy, David understood what it meant that when you came to the house of God, you come with a praise on your lips, a thanksgiving in your heart. David, that verse doesn't say exit His courts with thanksgiving and praise. It says to enter. Church, so many times we come into worship and we're waiting for our favorite song, or we're waiting to make sure the music isn't too loud, or did the pastor shake my hand? All those things are important in the right context, but that should never determine how we worship Him. Because God is saying you should be coming into this house worshiping me. Now I'm going to give you an example of how this goes down. This is a little expressive. I know that shocks some of you, but I want you to bear with me. This is the typical Sunday morning around this country, maybe even around this community, maybe even some of you in church this morning. This is a typical Sunday morning. Mommy and Daddy, Susie and Johnny. If your name is Susan or Johnny, I'm not picking on you, okay? I don't know if there is anyone out here, but it's just a common name. They get up to go to worship. Susie, come get out of the bathroom. It's time to go to worship. Johnny, oh my word, if you put those shoes on the wrong feet one more time, I swear to God, I'm going to, oh my, honey, this is not a fashion shoot. Let's go. We're going to church. Oh my word, I can't believe you guys are ridiculous. Wake up 5 minutes before it's time to leave, and now we got to go to worship. I'm going to the car. I'll wait for you. Honk, honk, get in the car. It's time to go to worship. Mom comes out. She's, makeup's half on, she's, pantyhose around her neck. I'm not. And so he's stumbling to the car, and get in this car. I'm driving. Kids are fighting, and you're slapping them in the back, Stop fighting. We're going to worship. Oh my word. Wait till, man, we get home, you're so, And so we get to, man, we get out of the door, we jump out of the car, walking into the house of God, and we open the door. It's like, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes. I have lived that. I was on the road for 10 years with my 2 sisters. I hated them on Sunday morning. We would get, oh my word, two girls, 1 bathroom. Here, you can't get in. They could never get in the bathroom. Some of you are getting that. They were always knocking on the... So, and we're driving to church, and, we're fussing and fighting, mom and dad, we're all... And then we'd get up, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Church, I beg of you, please don't come to church like that. That will kill a worship service, and it'll kill your worship. Now think of David. Boy, David, alarm clock goes off. Woo! Time to go to church. Oh, yes, Susie, you look great, even though you've changed 20 times. Woo! All right, Johnny, shoes on the wrong feet. That's okay. Let's get in the car and go. We get to go to the house of God this morning. You see, David was not just content with going. He was going to go with worship in his heart, worship on his lips. And that is passionate worship. And I need to work out more. But I'm telling you right now, David understood what it meant. The guy was, in fact, there's a verse in the scriptures where he says, let me read you that. This is funny. The King James Version, I grew up, King James only church. It would say, the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Okay, my version is, the excitement of the house of God, it is eating me alive. And that's what David embodied. He was so excited about worshiping him. He didn't care what people thought about him. He was not concerned with all the other things about worship. All he wanted to do was worship his Creator. You know what's interesting about David? David, if you read the Psalms, and I know he didn't write all of them, but when you read the ones he wrote those in some of the most terrible times in his life. The great sin with Bathsheba, him losing 4 kids. He's still worshiping God, praising his Creator. When I used to paint for a living, we'd have these amazing worship services on Sunday morning, and then I'd set the alarm clock, and get up Monday morning. I'd have paint clothes on, of course, and going to church or going to work. And man, I'd be driving. It's about 20, 25-minute drive, and I'm driving, and I'm just like, man, this stinks. I want to go to church every day. I would go to church every day. How many? No, I'm not. Some are like, that dude's crazy. I love, man, my girls love church. And I appreciate that. Church should be exciting and an enjoyment. But man, I remember those Monday mornings I would be driving and God's like, whoa, wait, hold on a second. I'm the same God. When you were on stage with the lights on, the guitar in your hand, everybody's got their hands raised, I'm the same God. Don't fail me now. And I'm like, well, I don't know what you mean. He goes, are you willing to worship me on your way to work on Monday morning as much as you are on Sunday morning? You see, the reason David could enter into his courts with thanksgiving and praise is because on Monday, he got up. Woo! Yes, Monday morning. Woo! Okay, we need the rain. That's okay. I'm going to worship God. Guess what Tuesday morning was? Woo! I'm not going to go through the whole week, but you get the idea. Every day he was worshiping God. And then when he came to church on Sunday, he was ready. Church, now, next week, if y'all come in here doing that, Pastor Rachel's going to be like, what in the world did you say to them? You might scare her. No, actually, you won't. She'd love it. But we got to worship him. And I know we're talking a lot about outward expressions, and yes, those are all manifestations of worship, but man, in your heart, maybe you're a crier, maybe you sit in contemplation, maybe every once in a while you raise your hand, or maybe you let out a big woo. However it is you worship God, man, every day should be part of your life. It's not it's not what you do, it's who you are. Today I've invited my good friend Karina to come up here and give a testimony about what does it mean to passionately worship and how passionate worship has changed her life. Would you give her a warm welcome?
Good morning. Some of you may know me as the girl who does expressive dance and sign every now and then. And like Danny just mentioned, he asked me to give my testimony on passionate worship. God put the heart of a worshiper inside of me. And God must have a sense of humor because he didn't bless me with a voice that could part the heavens, so to speak. I remember sitting in church services feeling lower than dirt because I didn't sound like Sandy Patty. Hopefully somebody knows who that is. Or some of the other amazing singers. So I couldn't do the one thing that I was created to do. I mean, that's what worshiping God is, right? Being able to sing. Danny taught us that worship has to do with sacrifice, and that is true. Thank God I wasn't asked to slay my firstborn son, but I was asked to step outside of my comfort zone. For years, I had my own way of doing things, my own way of thinking. At one point, I was in a dark place, abandoned, rejected, ashamed, depressed, oppressed, and guilt-ridden. So you want to talk about that song when it says, you never know what it costs to see my sin? You don't know what it cost to see my abandonment, my rejection, my shame, my depression, and all that hanging on a cross. There's a good reason why I worship. Just a side note. God was the farthest from me. I couldn't get close to him because the only way I knew how that I had a desire to do, I couldn't. Even he failed me. So I got comfortable being there in that place. It was all I knew. So when I decided enough was enough and jumped off the carousel that was my life, which was endless patterns of destruction, of self-destruction, I challenged God to show me who he was. This was not an easy thing. The trumpets didn't sound, the angels didn't sing. It was hard. It was kind of like the story of Jonah. He said, "It's okay, Karina. You have done this your way. Now, are you willing to do it my way?" This meant that everything in me that was holding me back from being who he created me to be had to go. And I had to grant him access and permission to manifest who he is in my life. You know how hard it is to break old habits, to get out of old ways of thinking? He started with my worship. I thought worship was only singing until he birthed the expressive dance and sign ministry in me. It made me realize that worshiping him was not all about singing or being on a stage or something we just did on Sunday mornings. There are other ways to worship him. And dancing, that was easy, right? No. Tell that to a bunch of churchgoers who think that dancing or being charismatic doesn't belong in church. But God wanted me to step out of my comfort zone, and he was doing it through something I loved, him. You want to worship me? Then worship me. But it needs to be about me and only me. You can't worry about the person next to you who doesn't understand why you're doing what you do. When God said move, I moved, and I was uncomfortable. He hasn't stopped with the dancing. When he told me to pray for someone for the first time, and I mean ask someone if I could pray for them, did he and I battle on that one? But I did it. And the more I listen to him, the more uncomfortable he makes me. But the bolder and more passionate I get about him, the more he shows up, the more I am changed, and the more in love with him I become. Sometimes he nudges me, and I even say out loud, "You want me to do what?" This all started because I was willing to step out of my comfort zone. Now God has shown me who he is, and he has proven himself faithful. Now I am on a journey to believe that I am who he says that I am. And sometimes that means breaking free from lies that were spoken over me that I have held as truth. Just like when I met with Danny and Pastor Rachel for the first time. I told them that I just wanted to worship God and be a worship leader, and I went to the extreme of telling them that they could give me a dead mic. Well, they did the unthinkable. They asked me to sing for them. So I did, after yelling at God, saying, "You want me to do what?" So here I am. So here I am, still on my journey, but I look at how far I have come. Now the other stuff seems, it was preparing me for where he has taken me to. And to think it all started with a little worship. And if I can share just one more thing, to become a passionate worshiper, start with where you are. And if you are like I was, and the storms are raging, you have been doing this your way, step off of the carousel that is keeping you in your patterns of hurt and self-destruction. Be willing to face your fears head on. Stop telling God how big your storm is, and tell the storm how big your God is. Thank you.
I'm going to have Sam come out and just play lightly on the piano. And I was thinking about this, and Karina actually, we were talking before church about, we're all in different phases of our life. And maybe our journey into worship for some of us, maybe it hasn't begun yet. Maybe we haven't been set free. There's just really no easier way to say it. Maybe we haven't sacrificed yet. Paul said, "I present my body a living sacrifice." Paul also talked about dying to himself. And I believe that there's probably someone in here who maybe you just haven't committed yourself to Christ yet. Maybe that journey of faith has stopped, or maybe you're kind of unsure where you're at. And for some of us, maybe it just hasn't become a lifestyle yet. I'm not saying that to be ugly. We're all in different phases of our journey, and so I want you to just bow your heads. And if you feel like you need to come up here to the altar, then that's fine. But really, I just, more than anything, just want us to set in just a moment of silence and just give you a little bit of space to talk to God. And Karina said this in the testimony. Sometimes you have to be honest about where you are. Maybe that's where it starts. We have to ask ourselves, where am I in all this? So just a minute, just in contemplation, just sit and maybe in the quietness of this moment, we just kind of ask God, where are we? Have we been set free? Are we living a life of sacrifice? And are we just living that lifestyle of worship?